It's January, Seville oranges are in season and it's time to think about making marmalade. But before I do that, I've got a surplus of dried orange slices left over from Christmas. What am I going to do with them? I'm going to make an orange slice wreath, and with the leftovers I will store them in a sealed bag and hope that they're good enough to use next Christmas. My orange slices are about a year old, if not 2 years old, and they're not quite as bright and vibrant as they were when I first bought them, and as they age they do get darker over time. For my wreath I'm going to repurpose a wreath frame that I used at Christmas. This one is 30 centimetres in diameter. I'll need my dried orange slices and a hot glue gun to hold them in place. I'm going to tie a length of ribbon onto the edge of my wreath frame. I'm eventually going to hang it up on a command hook on my living room wall, and I just want to be able to disguise the white plastic hook, and I can do this by adding a fancy bow at the end. I've decided to add 2 layers of orange slices to my wreath frame, so I'm deciding what size oranges to use. So for the bottom layer I need to make sure my oranges are wide enough that they will go right from the outer edge to the inner edge of the wire frame. And then add your second orange, and as you do you'll see that it doesn't totally cover the frame, and this is the reason why I'm going to add 2 layers. I'll have my first ring going round and then I'll add the second layer of orange slices over the top where the 2 slices join together. And you just keep working your way round. So I found it easiest to position my orange first of all and then lift it off and then glue onto the metal frame and then attach the orange in place. And you can see here that as you're gluing that your glue will leak through to the work surface underneath, so you just need to be sure that your number one, your oranges are actually fixed to your wire frame, and you'll carefully need to lift the frame off your work surface afterwards. And I ended up doing this with a palette knife which I slid underneath. So you can see here I'm about halfway around my wreath frame, and I have started to add in the second layer of oranges, but for now I'm going to continue my way around the other half of the wreath frame and just taking a moment to make sure my oranges are firmly in place. So every so often you might need to lift the wreath frame up and just give it a bit of a shake and a waggle, just to give yourself peace of mind the oranges are actually sticking firmly in place. You don't want to lift it up at the end and discover that everything just slides off. So continue working round, and then as you get back to the top end of the wreath where you first started, just make sure that you choose oranges at the right size to fit into the gaps. You may need to adjust a little bit. You see me here going back in and adding in my top layer of oranges, and I'm positioning my face, eyeing them up in place first of all, so they lie across the 2 oranges underneath, a bit like doing some brickwork where you offset it a little bit. And rather than gluing the orange underneath like I did last time when I glued onto the wreath frame, I'm gluing the actual orange I'm going to stick into position, and then holding it down just to make sure it catches and glues, because the orange slices aren't all evenly flat. You do need to choose the flatter ones, but also just hold them in place for 2 seconds while they dry. I've speeded up this section of film because you can see what I'm doing quite clearly, just carrying on this sort of brickwork effect, but layering the oranges on top of each other, taking care to hold them while they glue in place, just to take account of the unevenness of the oranges. And then as you get back to the beginning, don't glue the last 2 pieces in. Play with them first of all to make sure they fit in smoothly and continuously round, and then when you're happy you've got the right width oranges, you can then glue them into place, and then that is the wreath all finished. And then it's the moment of truth. Number 1, have your oranges stuck firmly in position, but number 2, have you actually ended up gluing the whole wreath to your work surface? So the easiest way of lifting up your wreath is to use a palette knife and just slide it underneath and gently move it backwards and forwards, so you can just snap off those bits of hot glue that have attached to your worktop, and then at the end it's easy enough to scrape those off, and then you can wipe down your surface in the normal way. If at this point you discover that some of your orange slices are working themselves loose, well, you use your hot glue gun and just do a bit of additional gluing to hold everything firmly in place. Traditionally, we think wreaths are something we hang on the front doors, but I can't hang this dry wreath on my front door because it'll pick up the moisture from the air and the orange slices will start to go mouldy. So this is definitely an indoor wreath, and here you see me hanging it on the command hook on my living room wall, and I'm tying a double bow just to give me lots of loops so I cover up the plastic hook. Right at the beginning of the video, I said it was marmalade making season. So if you'd like to see how I make my marmalade using a kit, watch on to the end of the video. I'm going to use this kit from Robertson's called Marmalade, and all you need to do is to add sugar and water, and then you'll have 6 pounds of delicious marmalade in 30 minutes. There are some really easy to follow instructions on the back of the can. You just need to tip out the pulp from the tin, add 4 pounds of sugar, bring it to the boil for 15 minutes and then start testing for setting point. The beauty of using this kit is you don't have to spend hours and hours slicing, juicing and cooking down your oranges. That's already been done for you, and inside the can is the orangey pulp that you need to add some water to and your sugar. This is what the pulp looks like as you pour it out into your jam pan. Next you need to add 3/4 of a pint of water. There's no need to measure it out, as there's a handy little measuring point on the can. And then add 4 pounds of sugar, which looks like an absolutely shocking amount. And this really bulks out the contents of your pan, so make sure you do use the biggest saucepan you have available. And then mix the sugar through your marmalade pulp and bring it to the boil. The instructions on the can say you need to boil it for 15 minutes before you start testing for the setting point. The way I do this is to put a saucer into the freezer, and then when I think the jam marmalade is ready, I take it off the heat and then put a spoonful of the marmalade onto the saucer, let it cool for 2 minutes and then push your finger through it to see whether it wrinkles up, and that's the indication that it's set. Quite often this takes several goes to do. I haven't perfected the art of this, but you then need to have another go, so you may find you end up with lots of different blobs of marmalade on your saucer before it's actually ready to be bottled. As a novice marmalade maker, I always find that the setting point is really tricky to find, but my only advice would be is to keep going, and every time you sample your jam, make sure you switch off the heat underneath the marmalade, because if you decide it has set, you don't want it to go beyond the setting point and be too thick to spread. So I think setting point has now been reached. Now I'm a novice at making marmalade, so if you know better or have got any advice for me, please do leave me a comment underneath the video. The next job is to bottle up, so I'm taking my clean jars out of the oven where I've left them sterilising on a low heat. I like to use a Pyrex jug to pour my marmalade into my containers, and I've got a wide-mouthed funnel to make sure I don't drip too much. Although my sterilised jars are hot, I always do put a metal spoon into them just to prevent the jars from cracking. When you fill your jars of marmalade, don't forget that as it cools it will shrink a little bit, so I always fill it a little bit more than I think I should, in the knowledge that the line or the level of the marmalade will go down a bit in the jar afterwards. Once you've filled your jars, now is the time to add your lids, and just be really careful doing this because of course the jars are hot, but you need to hold them quite tightly to make sure the screw fixing is firm. As I said before, if you've got any marmalade making tips, I'd love to hear from you. So don't forget to leave me a comment underneath the video. And if you'd like to track down your own marmalade making kit and the supplies I used for my dried orange slice wreath, do check out the show notes underneath the video and I shall leave some links for you. That's all from me for now, and I will see you next time.